Welcome to BCBAs Who Build, a podcast powered by Head Start Health for clinicians who believe that there's a better way to deliver care in the ABA field. Here, we share real stories and resources from BCBAs who've built, scaled, and supported ABA practices firsthand. Whether you're dreaming of starting your own ABA practice or growing one that you already have, this podcast is for you. Okay, welcome. I'm Dr. Sara Feldman. I'm a board-certified behavior analyst, director of provider engagement over here at Head Start Health. And today, this is a solo episode of BCBAs Who Build. And I'm really excited to chat through some of the concepts that I've really worked through in my entrepreneurial journey of over 10 years and as a BCBA. And so come along with me. Let's talk through the real, the hard, and the difficult of being a leader in ABA. So one of the things that I think is most fascinating that I've learned, at least about myself and through my entrepreneurship journey, is that leadership is this huge opportunity for us to really look at a magnifying glass of some of the areas of personal development that we could probably improve. And so over the time, while I have owned my own company or I've been a leader at some point, it's been a really eye-opening experience for me to see, okay, that is definitely a blind spot that I've had. That's an area of personal development that I can work on. And I see a lot of that in how I react and how I respond to different high pressure situations. And to kind of put that into perspective, I used to think that being a strong leader was very much being the smartest person in the room, being the person who has the answers for everything. And I think that really comes back from our experience and training in ABA, where clinically that can be really, really helpful. We need to have an answer for everything. We can solve, we can think quickly, but leadership wise, it can become quite the disaster because you kind of become this advice monster. Everybody starts coming to you. They want answers, they want approval, they want problem solving, they want emotional regulation of some sort. And you are that go to person because that's kind of how we've reinforced everybody. We've let them know that you have a problem, come to me, I'll solve it, I'll make it easier for you. But what I realized over time is this truly is just overfunctioning and it really creates dependent teams. And at the end of the day, there are a lot of conversations that circle around this idea of what does turnover look like in the ABA field and what is our role as leaders? And so I get a lot of feedback from people who will say, well, the turnover is really high. I don't have time to invest in leadership. I don't have time to invest in my team in that manner because they're just going to be here for 5 minutes and then they'll end up leaving. And I think you have a choice as a leader. You can decide, okay, I buy into that mentality where turnover is high and we're going to be very transactional in what our leadership looks like. Or we can truly stop and pause and think about, okay, what is my role as an individual, as a leader, as a business owner in the life of this team member that's come into my company? And what's my responsibility to society as an employer? What's my responsibility to society as a leader? And what could I do? And so early on in my entrepreneurship career, I really took on the mindset of, yes, I might have RBTs that have turnover and that they're going to maybe be with us for a shorter period of time, but what could I do to give back to my community, make sure that I am creating really empathetic, high EQ leaders that are able to think and problem solve and be on their own 2 feet and truly understand what it means to interact with work that matters. So sure, there are some really important skills that we need to teach whenever it comes to actually disseminating ABA and to provide ABA on a daily basis. But I think the bigger task that we have as leaders and as entrepreneurs is really this idea of how do we create amazing humans within the offices and the four walls of what we do within our company. And so for me, with that kind of mindset, I really wanted to understand what does it take to be a good leader? And I think the idea that you're innately a leader or you're not a leader, those are probably things that are way in the past. There's a ton of information out there about what truly equals an evidence-based approach to being a high-quality leader. And so that's really what I want to chat through today. I want to talk about how we can lead well, we can lead with kindness, we can lead with clarity, we can also support our team members to become amazing human beings. And in that process, I'm also going to share a bit about what I learned about myself as a leader and what are some of those areas or blind spots that maybe I wasn't showing up as the best leader possible. And what did I do from there? So, as a really curious person, I always like to go to books. I didn't have the privilege of having a larger community like we do here at Head Start Health, where we can mentor and support and help you grow your own ABA company. For me, I had to be really scrappy. I didn't have those mentors around me. And so, what I did is I turned to podcasts and I turned to books, and I used that as something that really helped me be able to expand my knowledge base of what it meant to be a good leader outside of just kind of the norms of what we hear in the ABA field. So let's chat through some of the top three leadership books that have really changed the way I approach being a founder, an operator, and a leader in ABA. All right. So the first book I always like to point out is The Coaching Habit. I think in frameworks, I always want to know kind of what's a framework for thinking? How can I start to take that information and really make it useful? And so for me, The Coaching Habit, and I'm going to say the author's name, it's by Michael Bungay Stanier, but he makes a really easy to use kind of guidebook here. So for me, I am an ADHD kid. I do really well if I'm listening to something. So I can tell you that the audio book for this is 10 out of 10 if you want to grab that on Audible or at your local library. But then also being able to skim the book, super, super helpful. So the leadership problem that I had that I wanted to solve for was this idea of being an advice monster. I had created this cycle where people came to me for answers specifically, and I had lots and lots and lots of interruptions. There were so many times that people would stop what I'm doing and they need help with that answer because they didn't feel like they were confident enough to answer that. And I was being needed all the time. And so that kind of came with a dual thing. I secretly liked being needed. I wanted to feel valued. I wanted someone to understand the value that I brought. And so it was really cool for having people come and ask me, okay, what do you think about this? What do you think about that? The problem comes in is when you have so many different team members, you become this just true bottleneck within your company. So whether that be that you're a leader or that you are an entrepreneur and you're looking to scale and grow your company, becoming the bottleneck means that nobody else has a good idea that's happening and everybody's waiting on you. And you become really constricted by the number of hours in the day and the amount of bandwidth you have within your brain, which is a dangerous place to be. And so, this idea of if you're the smartest person in the room, you're in the wrong room is really, really important. And typically with ABA, our culture can be very much that we're rewarding fixers. I was getting a lot of reinforcement from that. And my expertise was also being confused with, well, then that must be, I'm a good leader. And so I want us to kind of think through how can we start to identify what can I control in this situation? What am I doing to reinforce the constant question asking? What am I doing to reinforce the dependent team members? Because I'm the one who's created this structure, and I'm also the one who can create the systems, processes, and structures of how my team can thrive with or without me. And so that idea of being the advice monster really um, felt very personal within that book because I really felt like this was all about my discomfort. It wasn't about my team member not having the ability to solve the problem, but I had created this world in which two things were happening. One, I was helping my team member have an easy access to a piece of information. But within that, I'm also reinforcing them to turn off their brain and to not think on their feet. We have to think about, have we created the psychological safety here for our team members to really be able to think on their own feet and for them to be able to say, yes, this is how I'd like to approach this idea. And then we trust them to do it or have the ability to figure it out. But instead, I was taking a problem that my team members had. And as the entrepreneur and a very young entrepreneur at this time, I really thought if they have a problem, it is my duty and it is my responsibility to fix it for them. Because if they had that problem, they wouldn't have had it if they weren't working for me. I realize this is super naive. This is very, very early on. And maybe some of you guys don't resonate with that. But for me, I'm definitely a people pleaser. I want people to be happy. I want people to enjoy their jobs. I want people to feel successful. And so I had crossed my wires of constantly being available, answering all of these questions, and confused it with what service mentality looked like. Really, at the end of the day, I was dampening their critical thinking. I was becoming the bottleneck and I was creating frustration points. I wasn't actually achieving what I thought. So, 10 key ideas I'd love for you guys. If you ever are interested in that, you think you're an advice monster, maybe you have created this bottleneck, whether you think that you've created it or that it has happened within your organization. The key idea here is that we should be asking more than we're telling. And when we use curiosity and we use questions, we can start to develop people because we're encouraging people to think critically and that they are able to problem solve and that we are trusting that they're going to be able to get to the answer. So we can fast questions and fast answers and things like that. It truly kills innovation. And so something I really want to go back to is that idea of being the smartest person in the room. If you're always answering the question first as the leader, they're going to assume that that's the right answer. But there's so many incredibly smart team members that we have that have better answers than what we originally thought. But we didn't give them a chance to really say that out loud. And so within this book, you can ask questions like, okay, and what else? And then allowing for that uncomfortable silence as you let your team member put together the thoughts. So, what else? What's the real challenge? What's the real challenge here for you? That question for me is always super enlightening because I'm a fast thinker. I like to see patterns. I connect things. I want to solve. And if I say, what's the real challenge here for you? A lot of times I'll get clarity and insight of the thing that I thought was most important about the information you were sharing with me was actually not what the real challenge was for you here. And maybe you feel competent in that. And I would have been a squirrel taking you off a different road. I can also ask, how can I help? Instead of assuming what help looks like, I can say, how can I help? And a lot of times you find out they don't want help. They want just to share and they want the space and you want them to hold, they want you to hold the space for them. And that's really, really great. The other area is what do you think we should do? So, what do you think we should do in this situation? Assumes that your team member is going to come up with a good idea. But I think the thing that you need to realize too as a leader is that team member is going to come up with a good idea and it's likely not the idea that you have in your head. And in order to help perpetuate this idea of don't bring your monkey to my desk and leave it here, we need to be okay with what the response is when someone gives you something that maybe was a little different than how you'd think about it. Have you created a psychologically safe environment for your team member to try new things and have successive approximations towards the ideal end goal? And so, is it okay if they try it and fail? Will you create a safe space for them in that manner? That's the only way that we can start to get people to thinking and stop turning off their brain when I'm in the room. And truly, this is something that is not their fault. It's my fault. It's the environment that I've created as a leader there. And so I stopped answering immediately in meetings. I made sure that we paid attention and we have room for other people to answer. I paid attention to the rank of the individuals in front of us. And so making sure that we don't always have the clinical director responding, but maybe an RBT has a really, really, really great idea, and we need to hear that. I asked people to come up with their proposed solutions, and I am okay with the response that I get with it, even if it's not the ideal answer that I was hoping that they would do. And then I don't rescue immediately. I'm going to let people have a moment of struggle. And we're going to create that level of safety and trust within our team that you're going to come to me if it's truly, truly, truly a problem. But from there, I trust you. I trust that you're going to figure it out. And when we started implementing these things, really, you saw a lot more team confidence, a lot less bottlenecks. Things weren't just waiting for me. There were new and creative ways to solve problems. And then I was building leaders because truly at the end of the day, I'm looking to help build humans that will be successful within our community. And when we teach people how to think on their own feet and not just mindlessly follow what it is that we're asking them to do, we're creating better leaders for our community. And so truly, again, the goal in this one was not to be the smartest person in the room, but it was to build rooms full of people who can think independently. And so that's really my over functioning area. And that was definitely an area that I struggled with and I still struggle with. I am very impulsive. I want to be able to tell you all of these things. But for me, that was something that was super eye opening and really, really enlightening. And so I'll always say go and listen or read, whichever one works best for you, The Coaching Habit, How to Say Less, Ask More, and Change the Way You Lead Forever. Okay, so jumping into book number 2. This one is an oldie but a goodie. And I've read or listened to essentially all of them, but Brené Brown's Dare to Lead. I've listened to so many of her books. And this was very pivotal in starting to teach me to embrace the human that I am as the leader that I am. And so there are a lot of shoulds that I existed with, and I'll experience share because maybe that isn't your reality, but for me as a leader and as a young entrepreneur, there were a lot of shoulds that I felt like I needed to be. I needed to be able to lead the room with confidence. I shouldn't be wavering. I shouldn't be so nervous. I shouldn't be afraid of doing something. And what I realized is all of those shoulds were very much me armoring up and masking up and being the leader that I think I should be, but not being authentically who I am. And so for me, whenever I came into contact with the Dare to Lead book by Brené Brown, I was really thinking through, why do I avoid hard conversations? Why am I thinking that being composed is the right way to be a leader? So, equating kind of this vulnerability and being imperfect with being a weak leader. Why was I feeling pressure to be confident and certain all the time? And I really wanted to figure out, how could I create that idea of my team buying into the vision, but I couldn't just tell them what to do. And I'll dive in more with that. I think, my brain goes to positive behavior interventions and supports and having system wide change. And so, how do you create a space in which a team believes in the vision of where you're going as a team, as a leader, as a company culture? As the clinical quality, how do you create that buy-in there? And then I felt really frustrated too in this kind of era of, I felt like I was surrounded by yes men. I was surrounded by people who would publicly say, yeah, that's a great idea. But there were a lot of like behind the door conversations where clearly team members were disengaged, had something to say, had better ideas to say, but they weren't feeling psychologically safe to say it in front of me. Again, my philosophy of leadership is I can only control what I can control, which is me. And I'm an imperfect human and I'm on the way to learning. And there's so much for me to learn and grow and change in this journey as a leader. And so for me, that's really where I start. What is it that about the leadership environment that I'm creating that is creating a place where people feel like they are not quite emotionally safe to participate in? And so really that's what I started with my study of Dare to Lead. We did book studies of this one with my entire leadership team. And when I do book studies, I really come from this perspective of, I'm walking alongside you. I'm not reading this and saying you should. I'm saying, let's read this. Let's find some pointers. Let's find some areas. And maybe we should, or maybe I should. Maybe you're doing it and I'm not creating space for it. And so I think that's an area that really we could do better just as a field or just as individuals. When we do book studies and things of this nature, it's not me disseminating from a pulpit and telling you, this is what Brené Brown says, and so therefore you should, but I'm a perfect leader. This is really about what can we do mutually to grow together and walk alongside each other to become better humans. And so really, that's really where I started from. The main concept that I got from Brené Brown that has stuck into me over and over and over again is this idea that you can't lead people past the level of emotional maturity that you've developed for yourself. And so I'll let that kind of set in. That can sting a bit. you think your emotional maturity might be higher, but when you start to break it down, what are the patterns or the things that you're noticing? And so for me, and I'll experience share was defensiveness. I would just demonstrate defensiveness, or I would be people pleasing. So I would not be clear because I wanted to be nice. I would avoid conflict. And so I would really use that idea of a compliment sandwich. I was telling you something good, burying the lead, and then wrapping it up with something else that was good. And in that moment, I was avoiding conflict. I was making sure that other people felt okay, but I wasn't doing what the team needed, what the company needed, what I needed from an interaction standpoint. And I was needing approval. And so these are kind of the areas that this is where I started. This is what I was hoping to guide answers from. Brené Brown's not going to solve all of these for you. You definitely need to come from a place of self awareness and self discovery and start thinking through. But it gave me some anchors of things that were like, okay, I can start to think about this. And I can also start to be self aware of how other people are viewing me as well. And so there were two areas that my team really, really resonated with, and it was helpful, is this idea of vulnerability is not weakness. And showing up as your imperfect self creates more honesty, more accountability, and more trust. Again, we have to have psychological safety within the organization in order to allow people to show up as themselves, and then also so that they can truly be a participating member of our company. And so it's okay for me to say I don't know. It's okay for me to say, "Hey, I got that wrong." Or, "Hey, you know how I handled that situation? That's not something that I'm really proud of. Here's what I wish I had done." It's okay to say this is hard, or we need to talk about what's not working, right? So these are areas in which we can be vulnerable, we can sit in our discomfort, and we can communicate in a manner that's clear. The other area that I think was super enlightening for our team is this idea of rumbling. I came from a house where we don't really disagree out loud. There's no fighting or things like that. And so for me, uncomfort between two people who have different opinions or see something in a different manner, it can look like dysregulation or disruption. But truly, Brene Brown talks about it being rumbling. And rumbling means that we're really going to stop pretending that everything is fine, and we're just going to talk about the hard thing. We're going to let the air out of the balloon, because if we deflate it, then we can actually get to solutions, right? So we can get to something that's solvable. But if we aren't being clear and if we aren't articulating the actual problem, and we aren't able to have conversations about it, then we can't get to a real solution. Rumbling could look like I am having high RBT turnover and I need to understand from my team why. What am I willing to own from that? So, is it that the way that I've done the pay grades are not working as the owner? It can hurt because it can feel like, yeah, I'm doing everything I can. So, is it something like that? Is it about our schedule? Is it about our leadership style? Is it about our benefits? But being able to create a psychologically safe environment in which people can bring those concerns to you, you can talk about them, you can say, okay, here's the thing. This is what I can control. This is what I cannot control. I hear this pain point for you, and here's what we can do. Being super clear about what you can control, what you can't control, and the path forward helps in that clarity and being able to truly show kind of that trust within that. And then the final part that I'll say for this was really the idea of yes men. And there were so many times in which our team lacked the ability to rumble. And so the default was yes. And when that default becomes yes, but there really is something underneath, then that's when people start to have disagreements. They start to have compliance, but they're not engaged. So I'm doing this activity because you told me I had to, but I'm not actually engaged, or I don't believe in the vision or the mission. And so we want healthy organizations to be able to tolerate respectful dissent, because that's where people are able to start thinking critically and to make better ideas. If everyone agrees with the leader all the time, either the leader is super intimidating or the team is completely disengaged. And both, I would say, are super detrimental to your organizational health at large. Okay. And the last one that I will point out that I found to be just super pivotal in my journey as a leader and an entrepreneur. And I've taken the book jacket off, but it's Patrick Lencioni's Ideal Team Player. If you ever read Patrick Lencioni's work, he writes a short little vignette and novels, and then has extremely practical tips and strategies on how we can use that. And so, with the Ideal Team Player, I wanted to start to go through this idea of how do we become more self aware of what we bring to the team. What are our strengths? What are our areas of weakness? How can I know that about myself, but then how can also my team members know that about themselves? And they can start to help coach and grow themselves. And then they can also help coach and grow their team members. Part of my big philosophy in leadership is that I am going to be your support and your leader, but you are going to be the support and leader and direct mentor for your team. And so I really believe in the power of our BCBAs and our clinical directors truly creating mentorship opportunities for our BTs and for our other support staff that we have. And so it's your responsibility to truly help and to grow that person. And the best way to do that is to start from a place of self awareness. So, Ideal Team Player breaks down this concept of team players need to be humble. So, I need to have humility. I need to be able to say, okay, I'm right or I'm wrong or whatever it happens to be, but I'm not perfect. The idea that I'm hungry, that I want something, I'm driven, I have this vision, I want to go after it. And then I'm smart. And it's not just like intellect smart, it's really just people smart, right? And so it gave us a language to be objective instead of personal. Now, and we can link these in the show notes as well. It's the intersection of how this humble, hungry, and smart really works that helps us kind of identify okay, this is my ideal team player. So we want to hopefully have a little bit of both. But when we see that somebody is a bit more of they're super, super hungry, but they are not humble at all, then or we're lacking people smarts, that's going to be an area where we might be a mess maker. And that might be something that we kind of see. This person has really great intentions, but perhaps they are just not very good at getting things done. And so we're making messes, we're not paying attention to the details, we're going too fast. Other area that I really I saw that I thought was super interesting and the label of it was when somebody's like super humble, but then they also don't have a ton of drive. And so it'll be someone who's has great people skills, they'll be super humble, but then we start to see that person be kind of a lovable slacker. And so that lovable slacker, it's somebody that like we would say, "Oh my gosh, so and so is so nice." And they're willing to help when I ask them, but I have to be super, super direct with them. They don't really go out and hunt and kill and get things done for me. I have to be really, really direct with them. And at a certain point, that's okay for some team members, but it does become frustrating because it might feel like somebody's not pulling their weight. Whereas if I have somebody who is super hungry and is a very good people smarts person, so they know how to play the room and the relationships, they call that one a skillful politician. And so that skillful politician is somebody that maybe isn't always the same person from room to room. They might not have any humility, and that might be a person that really starts to create problems. And so at times, the person might present as somebody who is really with it and has all the right things to say. But behind the scenes, what we see is they're not very humble. They don't receive feedback super well. And they can be really hard to work with. And so that skillful politician one, that's also super helpful for us to know. And so when you start to look at the ideal team player, the hungry, humble, and smart, it's really for us to start to self identify what is that we do well, what are some areas that we could grow, and then also how are our team members thriving within our personal environment and what could we do to coach that person? So it's really helped a lot when it comes to how do teams interact because if you have really great clinical skills and I'll give this example. If you have really great clinical skills, so think of that intern that you've had on your team who is on their way to becoming a BCBA and they are super, super, super reliable when it comes to implementing the treatment plan with Fidelity or the BIP. They can work really, really well with all the different kiddos you have, but they are not making friends with your team. They are maybe lacking the humility there, but they are super driven to become that BCBA or that leader on there. They also have a level of professionalism that they know how to speak to a parent or they know how to speak to a clinical director, but we're not always going to have that continuity of character. And so that's really when you start to think through, okay, who do I want to hire, fire, and promote within my company? And if you use the strategies that he has within there on the humble, hungry, and smart, we want to we want to hire and promote people who have a good balance of that or who are coachable and understand that they can move towards those three things versus somebody who maybe is lacking humility and is a little less coachable. Even if they're really, really excellent at delivering ABA, they can be more harm to the team and to the overall culture than it's worth. And so that's a really hard lesson that I learned as a leader is really thinking through, okay, will I be able to find somebody else who's going to deliver ABA just as well as so and so, but maybe is easier on the team and nicer to the team and more enjoyable to work with? And that's always a really interesting consideration to have there. So, all in all, I'd say Patrick Lencioni's The Ideal Team Player for me really helped with making better hiring decisions because I had a common language to talk about the areas of strengths and deficits that happened and whether or not that particular team that individual would be going into could tolerate that. It let my leadership team have really good, consistent leadership language. And then we all became accountable for those different areas. And so, again, I'm walking alongside you in this. I'm not saying that any of this is because I come into it from perfect, but mostly I come from a very imperfect place. And I have a continuous urge to want to learn and to grow. And so, this really helped us really identify what's a good culture fit, what is unique about our culture, which will be different than your culture within your organization. And then how do I hire, fire, and promote around it, which creates a team that feels much more healthy, much more aligned, and they can talk honestly about areas of weakness so that they continue to grow through them. Every week, we like to break up our episode with a fun game. And so today's fun game that we have is Big Box Red Flag of the Week. And I'm sorry to our big box organizations, this might be more pervasive to leadership in general, but you'll be our scapegoat for this one. Our red flag of the week is promoting the best clinician into leadership without having training on leadership. So, why does that create a problem? Well, we just talked about in our other segment about that intern, that one that is super hungry, super good at delivering high quality clinical care, but they're lacking humility, which makes it really hard to give them feedback. Again, great clinicians are not automatically great leaders. It's just the same reason why a great salesperson is not necessarily a really great leader of salespeople. When we have people who do not have the support that they need in order to know how to support from a leadership standpoint, we can create burnout. We can start to create micromanagement because we're coming from this place of fear rather than trust. And it can also make new leaders feel like maybe I'm not cut out to be a leader. Feel unsupported or they're ashamed that they weren't successful from the first time out. The ethical leadership look instead is to truly have leadership training. The assumption that because you're a great clinician does not mean that you're going to be a great leader and that there are certain skills that are teachable and that we can acquire in order to be successful. Now, I think the thing that we need to know as owners and as entrepreneurs is it's up to you to set the tone for what your culture looks like within your organization and how you want people to treat one another. So it's not just what do you want them to do, but how do you want them to do it? And that really gets into the gist of how do we want our leaders to interact with our team members? How do we want them to coach? How do we want them to mentor? How do you want your team members to slowly take on that gradual responsibility? Again, we have so many opportunities for people to get promoted or to grow in our very, very young field. But I would say, as an individual who has been given leadership in the past, it's really important that you take a moment and you say, okay, I'm going to be self-aware about this. Where are my blind spots? What kind of support do I need? And what am I able to take on from a bandwidth standpoint? It could be that I'm really, really happy at being a clinician and I don't want to manage all the different things that happen in there. And so at the end of the day, it's on you to be self-aware. It's on you to advocate for yourself. And if you're a business owner, really, I would love for you to figure out a way in order to make incremental growth for your team members so that they really get the opportunity to have that leadership training and that we can see them take on small tasks rather than saying, hey, congratulations on your promotion. You're 1 year in as a BCBA. Now you're the clinical director. Please talk to your RBTs about any trauma that comes up, deal with all the payroll issues. And by the way, here are 6 supervisees. Good luck, right? So that's going to just result in burnout and turnover. So create systematic ways to train your team. And let's not promote 1 year in without having evidence of leadership skills. So today we've talked all about leadership, the skills that you need as a leader, ways that you can find that. And so if there's one thing that I want you to take away to be a better leader from this conversation, it would be that leadership starts with self-awareness and self-leadership. And so we don't use the excuse if I don't have a mentor or I don't have something else or nobody showed me. If you want that, then you need to start with a self-reflection and let's find those books. Find the books, find the podcasts, ask people. The worst thing that they can do is say no. But if you would like to lead, start with being self-aware and create those successive approximations towards that ideal leader that you hope to be. At the end of each episode, we like to leave listeners with a permission slip. So your permission slip today is this. You do not need to have all the answers to become a good leader. You need to be curious. You need to ask great questions. You need to sit in your vulnerability, and you need to continue to learn. Remember, the best leaders are not the ones that are the loudest in the room. They're the people creating environments where other people can grow safely, honestly, and sustainably. You've been listening to the BCBAs Who Build podcast powered by Head Start Health. New episodes drop second and fourth Thursday of the month. As always, you can listen on Spotify and Apple Music to stay connected and hear more conversations around ethical care, leadership, and what it takes to build a better future in ABA. If you want to learn more about starting your own ABA practice, you can connect with us at headstart.health or on Instagram, LinkedIn, and Facebook.